Welcome back. We are now in the second half of our meeting. We got a publishing panel with two journals from Greensboro. And, you know, since I've moved down to North Carolina, I've always been amazed at the high quality of not only writers in this state, but the high quality of journals. We've got Terry Kennedy from the Greensboro Review and Rhett Trull from Cave Wall. And so we'll have a little conversation about journals. We'll have like a guided discussion. I've already shared questions with Rhett and Terry about what we'll talk about. And then I'm going to be opening it up to you all for, you know, other questions. And you can put questions in the chat. I think there's a way to do a view where you've got the two editors on the page, but can you see what I did? We have a little
Oh, that's cool.
Right.
Yeah, I have a frame around me.
Like the Brady Bunch.
Is this too like weird? Or is this
fine.
I'm fine.
You got too empty. Anyway, I'll figure that out. There are two editors here, and it looks like Terry's on my left side. Is Terry on your left side? For like
Me, I'm in the middle on mine.
Okay, so everybody's got Terry on the left and Rhett in the middle, and I'm over on the right. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce our editors, and then they'll talk a little bit about their journals for about 5-10 minutes. And then we'll get into kind of a discussion, kick off the discussion, and then we'll just, I want everybody, I mean, my goal is for the writers to understand better what the editor's doing, okay? Because these editors are already accomplished poets, so they get what we're doing. But I still think sometimes if we're not editors ourselves, we don't really get what they're doing. So, Rhett Trull is the author of Real Warnings from the Anhinga Press from 2009, and which received the Brockman Campbell Book Award, the Devil's Kitchen Reading Award, and the Oscar Arnold Young Award. Her poems have appeared most recently in Copper Nickel, Image, and Litmosphere. She received her BA from Duke University and her MFA from UNC Greensboro.
Sorry. Don't take Rhett away from me.
I got Greenville on my mind. Okay, she's the editor of Cave Wall and president of the Nina Riggs Poetry Foundation. And Terry L. Kennedy is the author. I'm sorry? Okay. Terry L. Kennedy is the author of the poetry collections What the Light Leaves Hidden and New River Breakdown. His work appears in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including Gracious, Poems from the 21st Century South, and You Are the River, literature inspired by the North Carolina Museum of Art. He currently serves as the director of the graduate program in creative writing at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, where he edits the Greensboro Review, as well as the online journal Story South. So, okay, if you could, we'll welcome them. And how about Terry? You can go first for this.
I'll go first. I'm happy to go first. So the Greensboro Review is published out of the MFA program at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. We published our first issue in 1966. It started in 1965. And so we're still going strong here in 2023, despite so much loss of support of university literary magazines, just really across the country. So we're really happy that we still have the support of our department. One thing I think that I love about the Greensboro Review and working for the Greensboro Review is that although we have some consistency, so Jim Clark was our editor for many years, over 40 years, and I'm the overall editor now. We have new genre editors every year. So we have 2 new fiction editors every year, 2 new poetry editors every year. And they really bring sort of a fresh perspective to looking at the work and the kind of work that we choose. So I really feel like there's a great variety of authors that we get into the journal on our pages. From people who it's their very first publication to people who had multiple books. But it's always a little bit different every year. And I really appreciate kind of working with the genre editors every year and kind of learning yeah, what kind of things they're interested in, right? It's not, I work specifically with the poetry editors, and my associate editor, Jesse Van Reenen, works with the fiction editors. And so I'm always excited really to kind of see what these poets are really interested in and the kind of work that they're interested in. It's a lot of fun for me and really opens me to a wider range of what people are doing these days. I'm a big reader of literary journals in general. And partly just because we get so many here in the office, we do a lot of exchange subscriptions. So I have access to lots of literary journals, which is really kind of a bonus for me. But just having those new readers every year is really a great thing about the review. The one thing that always stays the same is the care and effort that we put into the actual line editing of the work. And this goes for poetry and for fiction. I think that as budgets are cut, this is something that's really getting lost across the world of literary. Well, really, and also in kind of big time publishing as well. Is folks who actually care about line editing the work and working with the authors to improve the work. And it's something that we really take pride in. It's part of our mission too, is to train these genre editors in the art of line editing. So it's kind of baked in to what we've been doing for years and years. But I think that it's also something that we really do take a lot of pride in. My friend Julie Funderburk, who used to work with me, she used to have this great skill where she could take a literary magazine and be like, I think there's a typo on page 47. And she would flip it open and go down in a story, and she'd be like, oh, see, that comma shouldn't have been there or something. She hadn't done that to me very often. So I'm always trying to, I try to keep up the good work in that front. Although I don't know if I'm quite as good as her or Jim Clark, who could spot a comma that was in italics or a period in italics that shouldn't be. My eyes aren't that good, I don't think. But that's a little bit about us.
So I brought all the books. I mean, it was like when I was looking in my house and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Greensboro Review just showed up everywhere. So, and yep, and I think you get that on the bookshelf too. So it's cool. All righty, Rhett.
Okay, I hope it stays quiet. I just had to text my husband to come please tell the girls to be quieter. 'Cause my kids are here and I think I picked the wrong room to be in. So hopefully it will stay quiet now. I'm the editor of Cave Wall, which is just a family journal. So it's just pretty much me and my husband, and my kids help too. And we've had several different like assistants and assistant editor over the years. We started it in 2007. I graduated from UNCG MFA program in 2003. I think that's right. Yeah. And so Terry actually was very influential in starting Cave Wall and the Greensboro Review, and it was all sort of like before I started it, I really studied the journals that I love. And the Greensboro Review is one of those. There was a journal called Lyric at the time that just was a poetry journal, and I fell in love with that journal. It's no longer around, but I studied all the journals that I loved. I talked to Terry. I actually had a long meeting with Terry over lunch one day and asked his advice on how you do this, how you start this thing. So Terry is like my expert. But anyway, we publish poetry, and for each issue we have one artist for each issue with like black and white art. And we'll do like 5 or 6 pieces from that artist kind of filtered through in the issue. Things like woodcuts and just pen and ink, but just black and white, like no photos, no gray values. And then we started out, we were published 2 issues a year. Then we had kids. So then we went to 1 issue a year, and lately it has slid into more like, since COVID, more like 1 issue every I don't know. We're going a little longer than a year. So we'd like to get back to a good solid issue per year, and we will get there. But anyway, I don't know. I just love I have always loved journals. I started one in high school with a friend of mine, and then in college I worked on the literary journal at Duke, and I didn't actually get to work on Greensboro Review. I didn't get one of those editor spots, but I still very much like would hang out in the office when they were working on it a lot. I would talk to the editors, the girl who got poetry edited, the poetry editors that year, and I still learned a lot from just sort of being in proximity of the Greensboro Review and then putting it together and stuff. And then after I graduated from the program, I've always just gobbled up journals. So I think Melinda, I know you are a big literary journal reader, and like Terry is, and my house is full of literary journals. And so, but I would complain a lot. So I would read these journals and I just kept complaining to my husband, like, oh, I've read the new issue of poetry and there's like 2 poems I love, and the rest I'm like, why did they publish these? Like, they don't move me at all. And I kept complaining so much that one day Jeff, my husband, said, okay, well, what would it look like to publish your own journal? Like, what would you need for that to happen? And I was like, I don't know, that can't happen. That's like, and he said, well, let's talk about it. So what would it look like? So I described what it would look like. I described the poems that would be in it. And the more we talked about it, the more we both got excited about it. And so we just sort of made it happen. And one weird thing about Cave Wall is that we get it printed at Jeff's work. He works for a company that does dog shows all over the country. So like every weekend there are dog shows, and Jeff's company that he works for is doing all the behind the scenes stuff, right? So they build all the props and stuff for it. They go set it up. They sew the ribbon. There's a ribbon department where the women are sewing the winning ribbons and stuff. And then there's a printing department. They have a printing press because they print judging booklets for every show. So I went and talked to the printing press there about like what we would like it to look like and feel like, and the type of paper, and like, so anyway, Cave Wall is probably the only literary journal that's published at a dog show, at a dog show company. But that's how we've really been able to afford it too, because we pay a lot less for printing than we would if we had to go up to a bigger printer. So anyway, that's Cave Wall, I guess.
Thank you. I mean, I love both of these journals, and I remember like Cave Wall, I saw people like Jennifer Groats, Jessica Jacobs, Nicole Brown, all these people. It's just like such a fabulous little journal there. It's just amazing. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a guided discussion first, just to see what's, so I'm going to ask you both, and you can like talk to each other too. What is the relationship, like what kind of relationship is your dream relationship between the submitters to your journal and, how would you, so the reason why I'm asking this question is because it seems like a lot of people say, okay, I want to get published by this journal, I want to get published by that journal, from the writing part, and I don't feel like we give back to the journals the same way. Like that's why I do a lot of book reviews, because I want to, I want to help out the journals, because it seems like journals do struggle in poetry, because there's not a huge demand for poetry. So how can we like maybe make a bigger demand for poetry, or work together to make our journals strong?
To make a bigger demand for poetry would be awesome. If you can make that happen, like across the whole world, a bigger demand for poetry would be awesome. I mean, I feel like there are two big ways to support a journal. The first being, of course, money, right? Like subscribing, if you can subscribe. You can also, libraries can subscribe. So, you can go to your library and suggest that they get a library subscription too, if you can't. Because, I would like to subscribe myself to like 50 journals, and I can't. So I'll pick, 4 or 5 journals to subscribe to, and then I'll change some of them up the next year and kind of try to spread it around that way. But and then the other way to support a journal though is to just, send your poems, talk about the journal, tell your friends, talk about it on social media. That's always a big help. But I feel what I feel the most support for Cave Wall from subscriptions, but also just from like submitters, really. Like when people send me poems, I feel supported. I do. I feel like, hey, they want to be in Cave Wall, and that feels good. And I love to read people's poems, which is why I started Cave Wall. I love to read people's poems and share the ones I'm excited about. So I mean, just sending your work really is a good way to support. But yeah, money helps keep it going too. So
Yeah, I'll second what Rhett said about libraries. I'm a big believer in suggesting that libraries order poetry books and subscribe to journals. I'm constantly asking the library here at UNCG to order poetry books, and most libraries like it when people suggest books in general, because they don't necessarily know what the readers want, and they're kind of guessing. They get catalogs and stuff to choose from, but most librarians that I've talked to who are like in charge of ordering, they like to get suggestions. And two, they like poetry because poetry is really cheap compared to other books that they might have to be buying. And so they don't mind ordering poetry books because it's really a small part of their budget. And if the readers want them, then they're really happy to do that. Also, I'll second Rhett in just saying that, like, when you read a poem or a story in a journal that you like, to be, sharing that on social media is a wonderful way just to get the word out about the journal. I teach a course in literary citizenship here occasionally at UNCG. And one of the first things I do at the start of the semester is give every student a huge stack of postcards. And I tell them whenever they read something that they like in a literary journal or read a book that they like, they need to send a postcard to the editor of the journal or to the author of the book and just say, hey, I really enjoyed this story, or I really enjoyed your book. That can also go a long way towards just, boosting people's confidence. And also to chime into what Rhett said, sending work is a great way to support a literary journal. And especially if you really love a journal, even if they're not accepting your work, to continue sending your work to them is just a great way of showing love. I think that we get so much work, and I think one of the worst parts about being an editor is having to send out rejection responses. I mean, there are just so many poems that we love here at the Greensboro Review, and so many stories. But being print journals like we both have, there's really a limited amount of space. We can only publish like 20 poems. We can only, physically like edit and take care of 6 or 8 stories. So we don't have a budget just to take everything that we want. And so it's so hard to say no, and it's gratifying to see people's names come back. I would even say, subconsciously after a while, those poems are going to start to come up to the top a little bit, because even if you don't remember specifically that, hey, this was Melinda Thompson's poem, there's going to be something in the back of your mind that says, what is it? There's something about this. I need to reread this again. And that can make a difference when you're going through poems. I think I was looking today, and we got about 700 poetry submissions for the issue that we're reading right now. And that's 3 to 5 poems per issue, and we're going to take 20. And so, we're reading a lot, and people who have resubmitted, if that's in our minds as we're reading, that's just something else that's going to make the piece stand out. There's certainly lots of journals I've submitted to forever until I finally got in, and there's also some kind of like a gratification to be able to go, woohoo, yeah, finally, after all this time, I made it in. I remember getting an actual note from an editor who was sort of the overall editor and not the poetry editor, but he sent me a note and said, I've always loved your poems, and I'm so glad that the poetry editor finally selected one for the journal. I was so happy to see that it got in. And I think that was nice for me as a poet, but I think that that's true of a lot of editors, because it is, for a journal like us, it really is sort of shared work. And we can't I can't just by fiat tell the staff to take this or that, because the editors themselves need to be invested in what's being published in order for it to be done well.
Well, Terry, did you know Elena read your poem this morning to start off our meeting?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so Elena started off with the Terry Kennedy poem. So that was pretty awesome. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Rhett.
No, that was okay. I was just gonna say that, to just reiterate what Terry said about keep sending, because I think a lot of people when they get like a rejection, I think there a lot of people would just sort of give up on that journal. But I read blind, so I don't know whose poems I'm reading when I'm reading them. But it's one of the most exciting things for me to fall in love with some poems, match it up to the cover letter, and be like, oh my gosh, it's, let's say it's somebody who's submitted 5 or 6 times before and always come close. And I've always written nice notes and to please keep trying. And they listened and they kept trying. And this is the batch. This is the one, finally. And that's like my favorite every issue. Probably at least 2 poets per every issue are people who have submitted to us before and didn't take anything but encouraged them to submit again. So really don't get scared away from a journal by a no. Just has to be the right poem at the right time, and maybe your next batch will be it. So,
Yeah.
and it does feel good to see people continue to send. It really does.
I must say, Rhett, I've got a positive folder that's got a bunch of your rejections in it because you say
Well, see, those poems mean something to me too. Like, just because we don't publish a poem, like Terry said, he gets so many, and I fall in love with so many, but Like, okay, let's say I'm in love with this many, but I can only fit this many in an issue. So I have to let a good chunk go that I really love. Melinda's, lots of those have been yours. And so I do try to write, I do try to tell the poets when I've really been moved by their work, because even though I can't publish it, I have just for them to know that I have read it and loved it, and someone was moved by something they said. Like, okay, it's not going to be in cave wall, but it moved someone, and I'm glad that they sent it. So like, to me, I do feel like I have a relationship with not just the poets that we publish, but with so many that we have not published. But I feel like they are part of the Cave Wall family because I've read their poems many times and I've had good correspondence with them, or they've subscribed, or both. And I feel like I love them and their work, even if we haven't published something yet.
Okay.
We had like a question and about like line editing for poetry and like, is that kind of unusual? And I think it is. I know, Rhett, you do a lot of line editing of your work. I know that the Southern Review, Jessica does a lot of line editing for poetry, but I think it is more common with fiction than it is with poetry. And I would say we do line edit all the poetry that we accept, but it also does become part of the discussion, right? Does this poem need too much work? And because at least in our experience, also, poets are much more resistant to being edited than fiction writers. And so if there is something sort of going on within the poem that we feel like would be a game changer, right? Like, we would really love this poem, but there's a wildly inconsistent use of commas in this poem. Do we feel like the poet is going to work with us on this or not work with us on this? And we do have those kind of discussions, in editorial, and sometimes it just ends up being, that the editors send that person a note and say, we just don't think this poem is quite ready yet, but please work on it and send this back to us. Or, we really love this poem, but you didn't nail the ending. And we're not comfortable like telling people you need to rewrite the last stanza, right? But we might say, take a crack at the last stanza and send it to us again, something like that. So we do try to we do think about that ahead of time. I think that on the fiction side, they're much more jumping in and really having, some of our fiction editorial letters that go out to the authors. I shouldn't say some of them. Most of them are over 20 pages. They could be as long as the story itself. Whereas for poetry, it might be a page. We might have a page of questions. A lot about consistency, generally speaking.
Yeah, most of my line edits have a lot of it is grammatical. I'm not gonna. I usually don't accept a poem that I feel like needs a lot of work. I have, but I usually don't, and I'm never accept something that I am not willing to 100% publish as is if the author doesn't change a thing. So a lot of times when I send a letter, I'll point out a few things and ask them to think about why they have this here, what this is doing for the poem, what this change might do, but it's always up to them. I'm not gonna accept something that I'm not willing to publish as it is. Now, a lot of times I will, if I do feel like something's almost there, but not quite, I think one thing that makes Cave Well a little different is I send a whole lot of like personal rejections and also a lot of notes on people's poems. I mean, a lot of times if something moves me and I'm not going to publish it, but I get excited about the poem, I'll sometimes write a bunch of stuff on the poem and send it back. Sometimes it's all like, oh, I love this right here, I love this right here. And sometimes it's like, oh, you lost me in this part a little or whatever. But usually the more detailed it is, the more I really liked the poem because I like thinking about it. And so it made me want to write to the poet about it and talk about what it's doing or where it could do it a little better. But that's also why partly of why K-Ball's response time is probably one of the slowest too. I definitely have a slow response time because and the majority of what I send back is personal. And that takes a little extra time.
Rhett, you want to talk a little bit about like, since we're talking a little bit about responses and acceptance versus rejection, about sort of the role of putting an issue together and how the poems fit together. Because Cave Wall to me that they're always there does seem to be, you're not publishing a whole book of poems that are all nature poems or something. There's a decent sort of variety, but they also seem to fit together.
Yeah, I'm a little baffled by that. Like I don't know if it's like if you gather, 35 random poems and read them all together, maybe any 30 or 35 poems you gather have some sort of cohesion. Maybe it's this magical thing about poetry, or whether it's that I subconsciously am doing it. Because I'm not, as I read through and start selecting things, I'm not like thinking, okay, this issue is gonna have a lot of poems um, about, okay, for example, our new issue, death and sex. Okay, our new issue has a whole lot of death and sex, and I don't like together in a lot of the poems even, and I'm like, I didn't do that on purpose. So I either subconsciously did it, or lots of poetry in the world has to do with both of those subjects in some way, and it just so happens that as I was reading through, that's the thread that I found. I really don't know. I suspect there's something subconscious that goes on, but it's not like it's sort of magic. It's sort of magic. I don't know.
Maybe it is magic. There was an issue of the Greensboro Review. I love to tell the story where we got like 15 stories that all had Zambonis in them. Those machines that shave the ice. Like, why would you? I mean, we published one of them, but why would suddenly all these people be sending stories with Zambonis in it? Like, I don't know. There's something in every issue where the editors they'll have little post-it notes up, and I think like the last issue it was dead mothers, and so they just had like, 1, 2, 3, 4, crop 5. How many dead mother stories are we going to get in here? But it's something that we think about at the review, right? Where even if the 5 dead mother stories were the 5 that they were all super excited about, we're not going to publish 5 stories that are all the same. We are trying to get a little bit of variety there.
Okay. I think what we'll do is we will open it up. There's some questions coming through the chat and back into the big room. Back into the big room. I'm going to pin Rhett, and so I'll pin Terry up at the top. And so if you have the, oh, this is much better. I'm sorry. Now you're together. Like, I see there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Could you like speak to your question a little bit more in terms of like the boundaries of language and specific?
Yeah, I was wondering that.
If you could speak to whether you look at a poem and might reject it because it uses certain taboo words. I sometimes wonder that when I send poems out, should I send it to this or that journal because of the language that I've used?
I've never, I can honestly say in the 30 plus years I've been here, we've never really had an instance in our editorial discussions where we've been like, no, because of this word choice, we're not going to accept the poem. Although I could see where that could happen. I do. I think that depending on the context, right?
I'm not talking about hateful language.
Yeah. It really hasn't. You know, I can recall some instances where we might have suggested a word be changed because it just seemed out of left field. But like Rhett, to kind of go back to what she said, when we accept a poem, we accept it as is, and we make editorial suggestions. And so, you know, we're not. Yeah, I don't think I've ever really. I don't think I've ever rejected a poem because of language specifically.
Yeah, I think hate language I have, misogynistic, a couple of times.
Right, and I could see that to like what your point there is. I mean, we certainly have when it seemed like the subject matter, right? Like
Mhm,
this poem just seems misogynistic on the whole, and this is just not.
mhm.
You know, also that's a discussion of do we like this? You know, and no, like that isn't really something we're interested in. So
There's not like a like I know I've heard the craziest things over the years. I'm sure everyone here has about like, and I don't know where they come from, but like, oh, you should never submit a poem with the word cicadas in it. And like I hear weird things like that, and I'm like, that doesn't make, that's completely ridiculous. Like, um I heard an editor of one journal, or no, I heard someone say they had heard an editor say, don't send them any poems that have dead grandmothers or dead cats. And I mean, no, I've published a poem about a dead grandmother and a dead cat, like in the same poem. Like it's I don't know. I think worrying about offending editors with certain words or certain subject matters, or worrying if certain subject matters are tired and an editor's tired of them or whatever is, I mean, you can't control whether an editor is a good open-minded editor or not. You just do your work and send it out, and you can't worry about stuff like that. It's most editors are not, I think, gonna be hung up on something like that. I see someone asks about how important the bio is, and also I think there was a question submitted about that, about cover letters and like what if you don't have a strong history of publication or whatever. And it doesn't matter. I don't even read cover letters. When something comes in the mail, I open it, I skim the cover letter to make sure there's nothing I need to respond to or reply to right away. Then I separate them and give everything a number. And by the time I get to the poems, I don't know whose it is. I don't know anything about the poet. And not every journal reads blind, but I still think most editors, 90% of editors out there don't even really think about the cover letter. They just are looking at the work and the poems. And I get super excited when I flip out over something and match up the cover letter, and it's just going to be like this poet's first publication. I mean, that's like one of my happiest things. So I get probably happier about that than like matching it up and it's a famous poet. Yeah, I'm happy about that. But like, I get so happy to be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe no one else has published this poet and I get to be the first one. So it doesn't matter.
yeah, we don't read blind at the Greensboro Review, but no one really gets preferential treatment because of their bio. Except I will give one caveat to that. I always make sure anybody who's been like a previous contributor, that I go back and relook at their submission again as we're getting towards the end of the editorial process, just to make sure we haven't overlooked something, um, and to make sure I can respond to them personally, if the poems aren't ultimately, or story isn't ultimately accepted. But in terms of like whether a piece is chosen or not, it really makes no difference, and it seems like there is a gambit for every single issue.
Mhm.
I used to joke with Jim Clark that it seemed like the fiction editors and him purposefully rejected famous people and in favor of putting new voices up. But again, I mean, that was sort of me poking fun at him. And again, it was part of his ethos, and has continued to be the ethos of the journal, is that we're trying to choose the work that excites the genre editors the most. It's not my journal, or it wasn't Jim's journal. It's ours together as an editorial group.
Okay, anybody else have questions? Do we miss some of the questions in the chat, or you?
Bill asked about what journals to read. And one, I love Rhett's. I always read Cave Wall. It's one of my favorites. I think it probably would be that way even if I didn't know Rhett, because the just, I don't know, we probably share a wavelength in terms of the kind of work we like. But man, we have so many wonderful journals in North Carolina, depending on what you're sort of interested in. I know somebody put in the chat that they got a really lovely note from Shelby Stevenson one time, and I'm assuming that was when he was editing Pembroke magazine, which is like a wildly underlooked literary journal. They always publish such wonderful work. They're doing it now. They did it when Shelby was there. It's just really great. And Keith Flynn at the Asheville Review is always doing great work. If we're going to kind of branch out, I love the Southern Review. I've never picked up an issue of the Southern Review where I didn't find poems that I didn't love. Copper Nickel, which was founded by Jake Adam York, who founded Story South and gave it to me to edit, always has really wonderful poetry too. They're just, they always knock it out of the park. As well as Beloit Poetry Journal. They seem to always have really great work, and they're not like flashy or anything, but just wonderful poems.
I'll add a couple. I like all those. I like 32 Poems. I like Poet Lore has always published really great set of poems in each issue. And I think like one of my favorite journals that I don't think a lot of people know about is the Hampton Sydney Poetry Review. And I love that journal. And they also publish just they'll have like a little back matter in each issue where they'll take 4 or 5 of the poets in the issue and they'll ask them each the same like 4 or 5 questions, and then they print their answers to those questions in the back, which I always love that part too.
Yes, I'll type mine into the.
Yeah, I see that question. I'll type mine in too.
There was a question, I think it's, let's see. From Diana, how do we hit the mark for the Greensboro Review and for Cave Wall?
How do you hit the mark? Well, I have that question myself. For a lot of journals, I keep trying to hit the mark in with my own work. I don't, there's just not a magic, there's not a magic answer. Obviously read what we publish, because you might sort of start to get a feel for what the type of things we like. But also, I mean, I like a wide variety of things. When people ask me, what am I looking for as an editor? What am I looking for in a poem? I mean, my only real answer is, because I like so many different types of poems, is I just want to be moved. Moved to laughter, moved to sadness, moved to just feel something. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So I guess just keep trying and make sure the poems that you write, I say this like it's easy to do, but I mean, make sure there's something at stake, like there's some deeper level to the poem. So like, okay, let's say I'm gonna write a poem about a tree, but it also has to be about something deeper than the tree. I don't even know how to say it. Like, it can be about the tree, but it has to feel like it's about the voice too. The whoever's there has to be, the poem has to feel like it's not a poem just anybody could write. It has to feel like the poem has its own voice that no other poem could have, even if other poems were also talking about that tree. And there's no way to like tell somebody how to do that. It just has to be tunnel deep into your poem as you write it and forget yourself and just like listen to the poem itself. I think that's the only way to get there. If it moves you, it's probably going to move me, I guess. I don't know if that helps at all.
I mean, I think that is right. I mean, I think we all, as editors, we want to be moved by whatever the story or the poems or the essays that we're reading. I think that your very first advice, Rhett, about reading first is so important. This is kind of a little to the left, but I can't tell you how often people will send us a 10 or 20 page poem, like one poem that's 10 or 20 pages, right? We only publish 20 pages. Like, why would you send that to us? That might be something that would get, really far along in the editorial process at Story South, where we're online. And so we're not really thinking about, we're thinking about number of poems per issue or number of poets per issue, but whether the poem is 1 page or 20 written pages makes no difference to us, but it does at the Greensboro Review. So we're just not going to do that. We're also, we're not, a lot of journals, I wouldn't say a lot, but some journals will print poems that go across the page this way. We don't do that. So if you send us a poem that has those really long lines, they're either, going to have to be broken in a way that might mess with the poem. And sometimes we will query authors like that. Like, we really love this poem, but you understand that in our format, it's going to have to be this way. Are you okay with that? So I think like reading is so important in terms of sending to literary magazines and just sort of trying to get a feel of the kinds of things that they publish, and also whether that they're doing like some sort of Ecotone has a theme. That's another literary journal I should.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, Ecotone, they have a theme. So if you're not like submitting to their theme, then you're probably not going to be successful. That's also another great suggestion, though, in terms of like sending out your work. If you feel like your work has a certain theme to it, looking for the journals that have the themed issues. I think that that's a great way to really kind of up your odds in a way for your submissions. Is to look for those themed issues and see if you have something that fits that.
I saw someone ask if we are closed to submissions right now, Cave Wall, and yes, we are. We typically have an open reading period every spring for just 2 or 3 months. And we only take postal submissions. That's because I get ocular migraines. So the more I read on screen, the more chances I have of getting a migraine. So I also really like I like to open the envelope. I just do. I just always have. I like to open the post office box and there's a stack. Like, I don't know. I just love it. So it keeps it fun for me. But we are closed this year, and we were closed last year, and we're going to be either opening back up next spring or the spring after that. We're taking after this current issue comes out, which comes out like in the next month or two, we will be taking a little hiatus because we got so behind with the pandemic. I had 4 excellent helpers and I lost them all and they never came back. And I've just been buried. So I'm taking a small break. I will be back, but you know, hey, we have plenty of back issues to read, and our new issue that's coming out is awesome. Terry actually has a few poems in that. It's an amazing issue. So, you know, give me like a check back in the spring next year. And I'll have it updated on our website about when we're probably gonna take submissions again.
But Rhett, sorry.
Yeah.
Does it matter if you submit early in the, I mean, for both
Oh,
early in the submission period or late or does it not matter?
so I want to say no. In general, it doesn't matter for Cave Wall. But you know, as I think about it, a lot of times if there's something amazing that comes in right at the beginning, sometimes I'm scared to accept it for some reason because I think, can I really fall this hard for something this fast? I'm talking like in the first week or something.
Yeah.
And then usually a few weeks later, I'm like, yeah, I'm in love with that poem. Why did I even wait 2 weeks? And then stuff at the end, the very end, we're usually getting pretty full by then. So at the end, I usually do have to, I'm narrowing down. And so it's, I really say somewhere in the middle is perfect, but beginning to middle is perfect. Still at the end, there's always like almost always something in the last 10 submissions gets the last spot. I mean, it's not gonna stop me from accepting a poem. Sometimes stuff at the beginning I really love, but I don't jump on right away because I don't want to fill the issue up too fast. So there's no magic time to do it. Don't do it at the very end. If you do it at the very beginning and it's awesome, you might have to wait a little longer because like I'm afraid of filling up the issue too soon. So, but somewhere in the middle is great. But there's no wrong. Stuff gets in every issue that comes all the way through. So at any stage.
At the Greensboro Review, we're really, because we're so tied to the academic year, you know, the like for the spring issue, when we're reading, the students don't get here until a couple weeks after the submission period closes. And for the fall issue, which we're working on right now, they start reading when they get back from the break, from the holiday break. And it's again after the submission period is closed, so that doesn't really matter for us. And we kind of also just we've always had this rule that everybody has to read everything. So you know, everybody reads, all the fiction editors read all the stories, the poetry editors read all the poems, so that there's plenty of like cross reading going on. And even rereading, once they've kind of narrowed it down to, these are the 50 stories that we like, these are the 50 poems that we really like, let's all reread them again. So it just really doesn't matter for us.
Well, I have a question,
Get
Terry.
it in on time.
Yeah, on time. Yeah. Do you accept stuff at the Greensboro Review all along, or do you wait until you've read every single thing to make any acceptances?
We generally wait till everything is read. You know, every once and again, there might be something that everybody is on board with. And so they're like, we have to have this. We don't want it to get accepted by somewhere else. And so we're going to go ahead and take it right now. But most of the time, you know, we have a production schedule and acceptances are at a certain point, you know, benchmarks. Everything should be read by this and reread by this, and we're going to make our first acceptances by this date. So yeah, sometimes it happens a little earlier, but generally it's just in big clusters.
I'm a really slow reader, and it takes me, and I'm a very careful reader, and it takes me a long time to read through everything that comes in. So if I did that, if I waited until the very end, like half the stuff I wanted would be gone. It would have been taken by another journal. So I do kind of accept all along. And so one cool thing about Cave Wall is that the poems we accept now, my kids call the poets to accept the poems. It started because like we used to, you know, I used to accept by email, and then we got these poems one year. I think it was for like our 13th issue or something, 14th issue. And they were by Jessica Jacobs. I had fallen in love so hard with them the second that I read them that I matched it up. I found her cover letter. I'd never heard of her before. And I could not wait to even email. Like, I picked up the phone and I was like, I am calling this poet. And it felt so good to call a poet and tell them that I started doing that. So now I like to call and give acceptances. But now that my daughters are older, they really like to call and give the good news. So if you get accepted by KY, you get a phone call by a kid,
which is
which is
awesome.
kind of cool, I think. Yeah.
We always try to call and accept all of our
You-
work too at the Greensboro Review. I could remember we had a panel one year at the AWP conference for maybe our 25th anniversary, I think. And Kevin Wilson, he's kind of really gone on to become a really big author now, but he was just publishing short stories then, and he was on the panel, and he talked about how he saved the recording that Jim Clark left on his answering machine for years. And whenever he would get rejections and think he should quit writing, he would go and play back Jim's message accepting his story. And that would keep him going. So whenever our students say, do we really have to call them? I don't want to talk to strangers on the phone. I'm like, you could really make somebody's week. You just don't know like how important that could be. So call them and leave them a message. You know, nobody answers the phone anymore from unknown numbers, but
Oh, yeah.
still leave a message. So
Mhm.
we still do that all the time too.
Yeah, don't be afraid. I see somebody saying that this demystifies things and makes you less afraid to submit good. I mean, I get it. I submit stuff too, and it is scary, but don't be afraid of the people on the other end. Because like editors, we're not out to get you. We do what we do because we love reading. I love reading people's poems. Whether even if there are poems in there, even if I read them and they're like not super great, knock your socks off poems. I love that someone sent me poems to read. Like that someone trusted me enough and was excited enough about being K-Ball that they sent me their poems. And like it means something to me. And I'm very grateful for it. One of the questions Melinda had sent beforehand was about is there like a secret ingredient to your journal that that makes it what it is? And for me, it's gratitude. Like I am so grateful for the poems that come in and for the chance to sit down with people's poems. And I used to have a little mantra I would say before I even started my submission reading for the day, and I would just say like, may I be open, may I be hopeful, may I be grateful, because like that's the attitude I want to feel when I'm reading submissions that come in. And if I've been reading for like an hour and I'm starting to shift into like, I gotta narrow this down, I gotta weed stuff out, I stop and I take a break, because that's not the attitude I want to have when I'm reading people's poems. I want to be so glad that people sent me this and so happy to read what they've written and hoping for like something amazing. So that, yeah, definitely don't be afraid to send your work out, especially not to Cave Wall, because I'm going to be so grateful that you did.
Oh,
I think, just not being afraid of, not feeling bad when you don't get in.
Yeah.
And I really do think most journals, the editors, like they want to publish the work. Like, that's why we're here. That's what we do. I like, I work for 2 literary magazines because I really love sharing literature with the world. And as I mentioned, the worst part for me is having to say no to people. I'm sure it's not like that everywhere. The New Yorker, they don't care whether you send them their poems or not. But I think for most literary magazines, it's totally a labor of love. None of us are making any money off of it. We're not getting paid a ton to edit it. We're not making any money off the journal. The Greensboro Review is operates at a loss every year. If we didn't have help for donors, we wouldn't be able to print the magazine. You know, so it's Story South. I totally pay for everything myself. You know, we don't make any money off of that at all. We just really like putting literature out there. And Rhett and I, poetry in particular.
Well, you guys, thank you. Thank you so much for this was wonderful. And I think we should all unmute and give them a big old round of applause. I appreciate
Thank you.
it. Yeah.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Great.
you. Any final thoughts from North Carolina Poetry Society? Anything?
Did we answer everybody's questions? Because I know they're kind of scrolling down fast.
Yeah, was there anything that was missed? All right. I guess not, right? Well, Rhett and Terry, again, thank you. Thank you. This was just fabulous. Fabulous.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you know, I love to talk about poetry and especially that. So, you know, it's
Yeah.
a treat for me.
And thank you, Melinda, for a great day of programming. It's been wonderful.
Yes.
That's been
Yay. Yeah, this has
Absolutely.
been like my dream day. Taylor Bias and Cave Wall and the Greenville Review. I mean, what could be, and the lunch and the open mic, right? It's just awesome. Awesome.
Oh, Melinda, you know, you had posted a question about the writing estate. Doris Betts coined that phrase that North Carolina is the writing estate.
Oh,
And she gave the network permission to use it, but she is the one who coined that phrase.
I must say, I came to this meeting today, the first time in a North Carolina Poetry Society meeting. I'm at 10 o'clock, not knowing what to expect. And I must say, it's been a very, very useful and enlightening 4 hours that I've really enjoyed. So thank you very much, everyone.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's been-
Oops.
all righty. Well, I guess Elena, that's it. Are we?
I
Are we
think that's a wrap. So thank you all for coming. I hope to see
Yes.
everybody in May at
Thank you,
Wayman
everyone.
online. We'll be streaming online too in May. So